It is a fitting time to have a video like this, right on the eve of the release of the early access of The War Within, to talk about what are the problems, what are the hero talents, for example, still not being played, still too weak, still balanced too badly. So what can we expect in these next few weeks to see changed from specs? Because we have had, for example, tier lists, meta tier lists of certain specs, and now they are expected to be doing based on the results in the beta, in the raid, in the simulations, in Mythic Plus. But some of these specs might still have problems. For example, saying that Frost Mage is a very good spec doing quite well as a Spellslinger Frost doesn't mean they might still have the problem of Frostfire still being too weak, for example, and being one of the hero talents we might want to see changed by Blizzard in these upcoming weeks. So if we start alphabetically from Death Knight, Death Knight is actually one of the better looking classes getting into the War Within from a balancing standpoint, from a healthy divide and healthy options amongst their hero talents, because Death Knight has Frost, which is playing with Deathbringer, you have also Blood, which is playing with Deathbringer, and you also have Unholy now playing with Rider of the Apocalypse, but also Sun Lane is still quite closely tuned to both Rider for Unholy and also to Deathbringer for Blood Death Knight. If you're also talking from a balancing perspective, right now the results of Unholy and Frost when it comes to single target are pretty decent, and when it comes to Mythic Plus results, Frost in particular is doing very well, by far the most popular of the melee DPS specs, right above Assassination, and Blood Death Knight is also one of the more popular tanks. So overall, as a class, they're getting into the War Within in a very healthy state. Not really much we can complain about. In fact, if there is one thing we are going to complain about as a Death Knight is going to be where raid buff. Where is our raid buff, Blizzard? That's the one thing you can complain about when you're talking about Death Knights. Talking about looking very good and being in a very good position, you also have Demon Hunter. Because Demon Hunter is one of the first clear successes of Blizzard in being able to finally bring one of the previously very weak, underplayed and garbage hero talents up to being actually playable and actually usable. For both specs, not even just for one. Felskard is now a very good cooldown-oriented, AoE-oriented type of hero talent. Aldrachi Reaver is more consistent, is more stable, higher single target, more consistent and less bursty AoE. It is still playable and still usable, both by the Havoc version, but also by the Vengeance version of Demon Hunter. Also talking about the state of the meta and how popular they are, Vengeance has been one of the more popular tanks in Mythic Plus in the beta, for example, until very recently, and Havoc Demon Hunter has had pretty good results. In fact, if anything, right now Havoc has one of the highest simming single target results when playing with Aldrachi Reaver. So, similar to Death Knight, not really much of anything to complain about when talking about the class as a whole, getting into the War Within. Where we do start complaining is where we talk about Druid. The thing about Druid is that initially they look pretty good. If you count Druid as not being a weird thing with 4 different specs and having 3 like most other classes, and you look at Feral and Guardian and rest of Druid, they are looking very good. They are looking good because right now Wild Stalker is quite a decent and viable option with Druid of the Claw when it comes to Feral Druid. Wild Stalker is a more definite, single target option in the raid for Feral. Druid of the Claw can be used more in Mythic Plus. For Guardian Druid is almost the opposite. It's Elunes Chosen, which is for your mega large pools in Mythic Plus with your big cooldowns. Druid of the Claw is better off on lower targets. And then you have Resto Druid as well, which is doing very well in the raid with Keeper of the Grove. And Wild Stalker is better off most of the times in Mythic Plus also for your damage as well. Unfortunately, Druid comes with 4 specs, doesn't come with 3. And the 4th spec at the moment, Balance, is not looking good at all. Which is interesting because we just mentioned Elunes Chosen being a very good hero talent for Guardian Druid, Keeper of the Grove being a very good hero talent for Resto Druid. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem for Balance isn't really the hero talents. The hero talents are still looking good for Druid as a whole. It's a problem with their spec. It's the problem with the changes given by Blizzard to the spec getting into the new expansion. They have lost quite a few important things as a spec that gave them some pretty good interaction and pretty good procs and gameplay changes like Starweaver or like Primordial Arcanic Pulsar. Things that spiced up your gameplay, your rotation, which now you just don't have anymore. Now you're a very boring, bland, Eclipse rotation, ping-pong type of spender, builder, and whatnot, which has not been very exciting. What's even worse, that currently your results in the beta are also looking dreadful as a spec. So that's our first black sheep of the results. Not the class as a whole, because Druid is still looking pretty nice, but just one spec. And not even about a specific hero talent, just about the state of the spec itself, which is balance. Now, somewhat of a similar discussion can be had for Evoker, because Evoker also does have some very good and decent hero talent options. For preservation, you have the all-purpose Chrono Warden, which can work with pretty much every kind of combo you want to use this hero talent with. And then you have the more bursty, the more burst-oriented Flame Shaper, if some fights, for example, are going to favor this type of burst healing for preservation, for example. It's looking very good. They also have very good high base passive damage in Mythic Plus as well. This hero talent, even after the nerfs, has an amazing Mythic Plus external for your tank now, which is very good as an Evoker because your single target healing is quite weak. So having this extra on top of time dilation is very good for you in Mythic Plus, so it's looking very good. Same can be said for He Who Shall Not Be Named, which is also looking quite nice, especially as Scale Commander even after the nerfs. Where we say they are similar to the problems of Druid is with a spec in particular, and not really about their hero talents, which is Devastation Evoker. And unlike Balance, where we said their problems are in the spec tree, in how they lost some things from Dragonflight, which has made them worse over time, in their case it's not even that. They have in fact been bettered in their spec talent tree. They have been streamlined, lost a couple of 2 talent points, 0 talent, and given only 1 talent point, so it's even better that way. The bad part about Devastation is sharing a class with the Innominable. That's really just their weakness. However, back to talking about weaknesses in your hero talents, we have Hunter. So there is one clear loser when talking about Hunter. And the clear loser when talking about Hunter is Pack Leader. Because right now, Pack Leader has clearly lost. Blizzard has not been able to do the same thing they did, for example, with Demon Hunter, and been able to bring up Felskard at the same level of Aldrachi River. This was not successful when it comes to Hunter. Sentinel, despite the 54 nerfs it received, it is still the default choice for both survival and marksmanship. They don't care, survival doesn't care about Pack Leader, marksmanship doesn't care about Dark Ranger, Sentinel is still the main choice and the almost practically only choice. Same goes for Beast Mastery in reverse, this time it's Dark Ranger after the practically double damage buff of Black Arrow, which is the default main choice over Pack Leader. So you do have quite lopsided options when it comes to Hunter. Their talents have been bettered significantly, you know, the rework, the much better general talent tree, the much better defensive they now have, so it's overall positive, because even with having a dead hero talent, your actual hero talents you are using are strong. But since the point of this video is to point out what are still the problems of each class and what is missing, then what is missing at the moment for Hunter is definitely a stronger Pack Leader. We can copy-paste what we just said about Hunter and just repeat it for Mage. Because Mage right now, despite having gone through a roulette of buffs and nerfs of their hero talents, we started the beta with Fire Mage being the strongest pick as a Sun Fury Mage, and then it was nerfed, so we flipped it to Arcane Spellslinger being the strongest, and then it was nerfed. For a moment, we went back down to Frost, this time moving from Frostfire they initially played to Spellslinger, because Frost Spellslinger was being giga buffed, and then Sun Fury was buffed again. And that's where we are right now. We are with Arcane playing Sun Fury in pretty much all situations, Fire Mage playing Sun Fury in pretty much all situations, and then Frost Mage playing Spellslinger. So Frostfire is the one that loses out. In a very Hunter-esque manner, they do have a hero talent at the moment underperforming compared to the competition. We haven't touched the state of the meta in a while. Whereas Hunter is looking okay-ish, in particular for survival and somewhat marksmanship in Mythic Plus, but for Mage it's even better. You have Arcane being super good in both single target and AoE. You also have Frost Mage being very good, and then you even have Fire Mage on the edge of being good. If their whole deal with all of their Lit Fuse and Living Bomb talents just gets slightly buffed, then Frostfire can also become a very good Mythic Plus option for Fire as well. So they are looking good, but right now they do have one main underperforming hero talent. Then after Mage we have Monk. So Monk is in a pretty varied situation. You do have one very lopsided spec, which is Mistweaver. Mistweaver is practically just defaulting to Conduit of the Celestials over Master of Harmony in every situation. The extra 90-second cooldown of Celestial Conduit is very good for the extra power of your not already very powerful cooldowns as a Mistweaver Monk. So that is the one lopsided option. But Windwalker does have a decent option between Mythic Plus and the Raid. Conduit of the Celestials is the to-go option for Mythic Plus, whereas for single target you have just a slight lead for Shadowpan. But even not having a lead, even just being even with the opposition is good. It means that at the very least you have a choice as a Windwalker Monk. Same can be said for Brewmaster, who is defaulting to Master of Harmony, but Shadowpan is also a pretty decent option. So between Conduit of the Celestials being played at all times by Mistweaver, between the possible split of Conduit and Shadowpan of Windwalker, as well as the split of Master of Harmony and Shadowpan of Brewmaster, ironically enough, no pun intended, the class of Monk is in harmony with their hero talents. They do have some pretty decent and varied options in their class. Yes, tuning-wise is perhaps not looking nearly as good. You're not looking like one of the best, 2 tanks coming into the season as a Brewmaster. You're not looking at being one of the, 5 best DPS specs coming in as a Windwalker, or even as one of the top 2 healers coming in as Mistweaver. But at least you know that your base of your spec, and more importantly, your newly added feature of hero talents is looking good getting into the new expansion. Now, funnily enough, the harmony of the Paladin hero talents are practically reversed. Rather than having a couple of options here and there for all 3 of the specs, you are in harmony in the sense that Ret goes for Templar, Holy goes for Herald, and Prot goes for Lysmith. So you practically are living in a segregated society where 3 specs are playing 3 different hero talents. It's also not very positive for Ret because the option of Herald of the Sun is quite far behind Templar. It's also not positive for Holy, where the option of Lysmith is not nearly as close to Herald of the Sun. It is more of a split between Templar and Lysmith for Prot Paladin, but in reverse, in the sense that they are both weak and neither of them looks very exciting. So it's been a while since we complained about the state of the specs, so after talking about the state of balance when it comes to Druid, and then the hero talent pack leader for Hunter, the hero talent Frostfire for Mage, now we are talking about the alternatives. The alternative of Ret being weak is Herald of the Sun, the alternative of Holy Paladin being weak is Lysmith, and the alternative of Prot being weak is Templar. So practically all of the hero talents, which is kind of a tricky situation. How do you buff Ret's Herald of the Sun without buffing Holy Paladin's Herald of the Sun? How do you buff Lysmith for Holy Paladin without buffing Lysmith for Prot Paladin? It's kind of a convoluted problem for Paladin right now and their hero talents. Now finally into a set of hero talents which can combat Mage for how much they have been changed, which is Priest. Because Priest started the beta with practically a terrible, Oracle, unplayable hero talent. The Holy Priests were playing just with Archon, and then the Discipline Priests and the Shadow Priests were just playing with Voidweaver, and that was it. However, after severe nerfs given to Voidweaver, in order to try to make Discipline play Oracle, it didn't work. Discipline still played Voidweaver, however, Blizzard went on to keep buffing Archon so that now Shadow Priest at the very least gets to play Archon, while at the same time Holy Priest was already playing Archon, so Oracle was buffed a lot, and now Holy Priest can play Oracle. So at the moment the balance, while being quite thin and fickle, is quite good because Shadow can realistically play both Archon or Voidweaver. Archon is slightly ahead, but we're not talking about Archon being a completely dead hero talent. Same can be said for Holy Priest. Now Oracle, after the huge buffs and still the absolutely insane power of Premonition of Piety, the arguably strongest, one of the strongest raid cooldowns in the game when it comes to HPS. But Archon is still a playable option for Holy Priest. The only one that is still very stubborn and very lopsided in their choice is Discipline. Remember, my initial prophecy almost 2 months ago was that Discipline would end up playing in the raid, Mythic raiding, playing Oracle. For now, it still hasn't happened, but there is time still. But for now, it's not looking too bad. At least 2 out of 3 specs do have options. The one that has slightly fewer options for now is Discipline. Then we might also have to spend one word about balancing, since right now we mentioned how Mage was doing very well and how Monk wasn't doing nearly as well. Priest is in a similar situation. Holy and Discipline Priest right now are reasonably weak compared to the other healers, but Shadow Priest is covering up for the slack as they are doing very well after the Insanity buffs given to both their spec and their hero talent. In Mythic Plus, especially in AoE, they are doing very well. Now, the next class also has received a lot of changes, perhaps not like Priest and Mage, which were throughout the entire beta. Rogue got the reverse treatment. They were abandoned for like a month and a half, and then they received 50 buffs in 2 weeks. They have now gotten into Paladin territory. You have Assassination playing Deathstalker, Outlaw playing Fatebound, and Subtlety playing Trickster. Unlike Paladin, though, it is possibly even more lopsided. For Subtlety, the option of Trickster is more lopsided in terms of power. For Outlaw, it's even more lopsided for Fatebound ahead of Trickster. The only one that is slightly closer is the option between Fatebound and Deathstalker for Assassination, but overall, Deathstalker is still pulling ahead. So we are definitely having a problem of balancing when it comes to hero talents when it comes to Rogue. You have the alternatives not being nearly as competitive as some of the other specs. Not too much to say about the balancing. Right now, Assassination is primed to be one of the strongest specs in Mythic Plus. Outlaw currently, sim-wise, has one of the highest sim in single target results when talking about Fatebound, and Assassination is more of a niche spec. Very good funnel damage, very good priority damage, and one of the highest burst damage windows, especially in single target, of any specs. So it might be used for more specific situations rather than the all-purpose single target damage of an Outlaw Rogue. So balancing wise, they are still looking very good, but the variety and the options of their hero talents are a bit lopsided right now. Now on to one of the more diverse classes. Now we got in here kind of in a stumbly road because of the rework and then the big nerfs given out and then the attempts at buffing and reverting some of the nerfs. However, the state in which we ended up here is actually looking quite good in terms of diversity, because Elemental Shaman right now, for example, after the long-awaited changes and buffs given to Stormbringer, which was previously practically a DPS loss for the spec, now it's your default pick in Mythic Plus. However, if you want to go back to single target, despite the nerfs received by Farseer, that is still the better option for Elemental Shaman. You even have a more diverse option for Restoration Shaman, because Restoration Shaman right now practically has 2 builds, one centered around Riptide, the amount of Riptides you can cast, the synergy around your Riptides, and in Mythic Plus, which is going to synergize with Farseer, and then you have the Totemic build, which synergizes with practically buffing Chain Heal as much as you can, and benefiting from all of the synergy that Totemic gives you with Chain Heal. But you can still play the Riptide build for consistent throughput healing and good spot healing in the raid, and you can still play the Chain Heal build version in Mythic Plus. So you have a very interchangeable situation for Restoration Shaman as well. Who is looking the worst when talking about their options is Enhancement, who is way more strict around Stormbringer. Even after some nerfs attempted to be given, it's still not a thing. It's still not close to Stormbringer for Enhancement. So talking about balancing, back to the problems of the hero talents, you have one pack leader for Hunter, you have one for Mage, Frostfire, you have practically all 3 hero talents needing to be buffed for Paladin, as well as 3 hero talents for Rogue. For Shaman, the main issue issue is in enhancement and in its option besides Stormbringer. And then, of course, balancing-wise, it's all roses, because enhancement is a very good melee DPS spec. Elemental Shaman is supposed to be one of the better range DPS specs, and Resto Shaman is also supposed to be one of the strongest healers. So right now, it's all looking very good overall for Shaman. Talking about another class that has received its fair share of roulette of changes has been Warlock. Finally, after a myriad of buffs and bug fixes, Soul Harvester has become a reasonable option, not just for Affliction as an option with Hellcaller, which is quite close and balanced, but also for Demo. Diabolist and Soul Harvester are also looking pretty even. Affliction does have the option to play in single target or in AoE as either Soul Harvester or Hellcaller. When it comes to Demo, you also have the option to go Mythic Plus or single target with both Diabolist or Soul Harvester. And both options for both classes are actually pretty close, which is very good for variety, for your options, for your choice. For Destro, it's perhaps not as big of a choice. Hellcaller is doing well in both AoE and single target, but when it comes to wide groups and large packs in AoE, Diabolist, with the amount of shards you can spend thanks to Diabolic Ritual, is still pulling ahead in Mythic Plus for Destruction, but overall it is still a pretty good situation for Warlocks in terms of options you have of hero talents and current balancing. You're not actually simming too poorly when it comes to single target. Your AoE damage is doing quite well. Affliction was one of the more popular of the range specs in Mythic Plus beyond the first three. You know, beyond Augmentation, Shadow, and Mage, you had Affliction and Elemental Shaman. So it is also a pretty decent position for Warlocks as well, and also for the balancing and the state of their hero talents. Lastly, finally, you have Warrior. So Warrior right now has a Slayer problem when it comes to the two specs using Slayer. At the moment, Fury has Slayer ahead of Montantane, and Arms has Slayer ahead of Colossus by a reasonable margin in both cases, even larger when it comes to Fury. So that's the first pinpointed problem in terms of hero talents. You have, depending on how you see it, you have to nerf Slayer to make it even with Montantane and to make it even with Colossus, or you have to buff Colossus and Montantane to make them match the power of Slayer when it comes to the DPS. Now, when it comes to the tank, who doesn't have Slayer but has Montantane and Colossus, it is a bit more varied because when it comes to the raid, the added benefits of both threes are really only just for AoE, and the problem is that when it comes to AoE, Montantane wins out by quite a bit. So you can kind of play both in single target without that much of a difference, because the main difference will come in Mythic Plus, and that's where Montantane wins. So if we have to look at a problem when it comes to Warrior, is definitely the power of Slayer for their DPS specs compared to the opposition. If we're talking about the meta right now, Protection Warrior was one of the more played tanks together with Blood and Vengeance, so at least from that copium angle, it's looking good for Prot. When it comes to the DPS, the Sims of both Fury and Arms in single target were looking quite good overall. In Mythic Plus, it wasn't nearly as good, especially for Arms. Their power is not nearly as strong, but even for Fury, they were far from being in the top 5 of results in Mythic Plus. So you do also have some problems in that regard when it comes to Warrior. But to recap at the end of it in this makeshift tier list of the situation of specs when it comes to their balancing and the state of their hero talents right as we get into the early access of the War Within, you have Death Knight looking very good overall. Across the board, full marks, promoted. Demon Hunter, across the board, looking very good, full marks, promoted. Druid is looking okay. Guardian is looking promising as a tank, Resto is looking promising as a Mythic Plus healer especially, Feral is looking okay, and then you have the black sheep of balance. No real issues or negatives about the hero talents, is more so the actual spec itself when it comes to balance. Also a promotion for Evoker. The hero talents are looking good, even if you do have advantages. For Preservation is Chrono Warden, for Augmentation is Scale Commander. They're not weak, the other options. It's just about the depression that Devastation Evoker players will have, having to contend with the with the banned word. Then we have the one dead syndrome for both hunters and mages. The one dead hero talent for hunter is pack leader. The one dead hero talent for mage is frostfire. When it comes to monk, you do have a bit more lopsidedness for Mistweaver and for Windwalker, and a bit more evenness when it comes to Brewmaster. I would say the main issue for them being Master of Harmony, across all three specs being perhaps the slightly weaker of the options. Then you have the most lopsided of choices, which we're going to bang together, Paladin and Rogue. These are possibly the weirdest to balance, because if every spec is playing a different hero talent, it means that every hero talent for at least one spec is weak. Because if for Holy, Herald of the Sun is strong and they never play Lightsmith, but for Protection they only play Lightsmith and never play Templar, but for Ret they only play Templar and never play Herald, which is always played by Holy, because they never play Lightsmith, which is always played by Prot, which never plays Templar, and I'm starting to get repetitive here. That's kind of the problem. Exact same for Rogue, where you have three different specs favoring specifically one different hero talent each. For Priest, it's more about one spec really. Holy Priest does have a decent option between the two. Nowadays, after the changes, even Shadow Priest has a decent option between the two. It's just one stubborn guy, Discipline, still not playing Oracle. Practically a similar scenario when it comes to Shaman. You do have pretty decent options, single target and AoE for Elemental, single target and AoE for rest of Shaman, and then enhancement still stubborn stuck on Stormbringer because Totemic is too weak. Much better diversity when it comes to Warlock. Soul Harvester is finally much more playable, so both of these specs do have decent option. The one that is more stubborn by a bit is Destruction, but at the very least they do still have options between different activities. AoE being Diabolist and single target being Hellcaller. And then finally, more lopsidedness with Arms and Fury both preferring Slayer over the counterpart, so Colossus and Mountain Thane. That's the situation so far with the state of the specs right as we get into the early access of the War Within. So to use this as a bookmark to then check how many of the changes that will come in the near future, the next 1, 2, 3 weeks before the season actually begins, to see how many of these problems are going to get addressed by Blizzard. So for today, we are going to stop right here and then eventually monitor any possible changes coming straight from Blizzard. But for today, on this Thursday, it is now time to leave each other. Thanks, of course, guys, for watching, as well as for supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as for subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, once again, something that was supposed to last for less than 20 minutes has gotten to drone on and on and on and on.